But I think by preparing the new generations to become critical thinkers on architecture and to be able to judge the decisions that they take, rather than just take those decisions for granted and follow with them, I think that's when you are creating a mass of knowledge and of thought that can make an impact. And I very often have students that come back and after they have graduated, they say like, this has made me see architecture with a different lens. And now I see projects in a different way as well. Because big practices, as you know very well, very often they are just in a sort of loop where they just reuse ideas from previous projects, transform them into other, and to bring something new into this loop is quite difficult because they think that what they are doing is the right thing. Clients like what they have done before, and they just try to do versions of that here and there. And I think that this kind of thinking of how can we, through the material, improve the way we use the space and the way the space behaves, minimizing how much do we need to add into it. I think that's something that we don't ask ourselves often enough.
Welcome, everyone. Today's guest is someone we know very well, although this time he's on the other side of our table. Usually we are on the other side, judging our designs. He's an architect, educator, researcher, whose work sits right at the intersection of architectural material innovation and sustainability and social responsibility. He's the co-founder of Sugarcrete, a material research project rethinking how waste, resources, and construction can come together. For the last few years, he's also been shaping how architecture is taught in the University of East London, asking students how to think less about perfect buildings and more about the consequences of what we design and how we should think about people and the uses and why it matters. We've known him as a tutor. Today is our guest, and today he's in the hot seat. Armor Gutierrez. So let's start simple. This was a big intro. How would you introduce yourself to a 10-year-old?
That's a very generous introduction that you have done, Stefan. To a 10-year-old, probably I would try to make it broader in a way, but also more evocative, saying that I'm aiming to transform the way the new generations can think about architecture and about materials and inspire new ways of building, both for the new generations and for countries that are currently trying to go away from how we have been making things for the last 100 years.
That's great. That's great. So, I mean, let's start to dive in. Before starting about any projects or your passions about, I want to know your background. Where did it all start from? Where did you grow up? Which school did you go to? How was your parents? Where did you get the idea about architecture? Yeah, just start there.
Yeah, I think that that's a very good question, and it relates a lot with the type of practice that I'm performing at the moment. So I grew up in the north of Spain, in a small village called Liancres, and there I had the luxury of living in the countryside, completely isolated from anything else around us. So we were living in nature, and my father is a visual artist that was practicing in Cantabria for many years. And he built a house in the middle of a natural area very close to the seaside, which part of it was a workshop and part of it is the house where we grew up. So we were all the time connecting with the work that my father was doing and being able to see that work firsthand. I think that is what inspired me the most in the first years of my education. We were trying to help as much as we could when we were little, and I think our father also tried to incorporate us in his work. So we were part of some of the videos, photography that he was developing when he was commissioned one of the largest pieces that he did as an opening for a new highway that would connect the whole north of Spain from France to Portugal. He design sculpture were photos of people that were playing a key role for him were exhibited in the middle, and we were curating those photos with him, and we were part of the installation as well. So from the beginning, I think he was very generous in making us part of that process. And I think that has a big impact on how I work now, especially valuing tactility, material, visual experience from a different perspective, and valuing as well collaboration, which is something that, as you know, we try to encourage our students to embrace as much as possible. And also, we have created an agenda now at the university that kind of promotes collaborative practice of making and explorative materials through collective making, which is also a topic that I really enjoy, and that also learns and draws from where I'm from. After my first years, so I grew up in this setting, which informed in a way what I wanted to study. So I decided to study architecture in Madrid, which for me was a big change because I was living with my parents and I was in very close contact with the workshop. And then I moved to a city where I didn't have those facilities. And the universities in Spain, they are not as well equipped as the universities in the UK in terms of workshops and exposure to making. So I had to work in my desk at home. I was living in a student accommodation, which meant that I was meeting people from everywhere in Spain with different ways of thinking, operating. The university was also a big revelation because I went from being the only one with interest in a particular field where I was studying in Santander to being surrounded by people that were like-minded and that were also enjoying the field of architecture as much as I was. And then the first years, it was a bit more isolated in a way. I was a bit more by myself in Madrid and I didn't link back to the workshop. But then towards the end of my career, when I was in year 4, year 5, I started to open everything that my father was kind of trying to teach us in the first years back into the university. So I started to develop models that were a bit different, experiment with materials that were a bit more unusual, that were maybe more into the art and craft realm, or materials that were upcycling elements from the workshop, and try to introduce that into my education. And I think that it worked very well. Like most of my tutors and academics at the university, they really value the models that came out of those collaborations. And when I finished my final project, most of the presentation material, I got it from photography of models. So I
Uh,
think that
yeah, sorry.
I link back my initial years exposed to my father
Yeah,
work at the end of the career at the
yeah. I
university.
was just wondering, as a kid, when your dad's always obviously engaged in such a design industry. As a kid, how was it for you? Like, did you have any other ambitions in life? Or were you also looking at your father and thinking, oh, this is exactly what I want to be? Or did you have something else in your head?
No, I don't think it was a role model in that sense. I think that it was more. I was really inspired by the work, but I didn't see I didn't see it as this is what I want to develop. It was more about being able to experience with a lot of things. I think that made a big difference. And seeing now, comparing with how kids are now exposed to a more and more limiting, it seems that we have everything in our hand, but at the end, what you are exposed to and your contact is with very limited objects nowadays, whereas there it was completely different. It was entering the workshop, was entering a universe where you could every day touch a different machine or experience a different process or touch a different material. So I think that to me was like what I was inspired was by, like, whenever I was able to bring some of that to where I was studying, to my friends or to my colleagues, it felt like a good connection somehow. Not that much bringing the practice, but more bringing a diversity or elements that were a bit unknown to other people. So it could become part of that discovery. And I think that's something that somehow it has translated into the way I'm teaching at the moment, where I'm always encouraging students to embrace what I consider more innovative or what I consider a bit
Yeah.
more out of the box.
Yeah, and you said the projects that you did in your university was also similar to the projects that you like would like to teach now. Is it more social? issues or?
It is. It is. One of the last projects that I developed was the brief was to design a school in Mexico in areas where you couldn't access with the trucks, or it was kind of isolated areas in the countryside. And it was speculative, but we presented for a competition, and we got a second prize based on the innovative use of the materials. And it was using bamboo. It was using bio waste with different binders back in, this is 2006, 2007. So it's already a good 20 years ago. And it was very experimental. We built a 1 to 50 model at a workshop with my father. We went to the bamboo plantation that is growing very close to where I'm from, cut the bamboo there with him. He got involved. I got very excited. And then we photographed the model as professionally as we could in the workshop. And then those photos were the competition entry. So we didn't present drawings. It was everything based on photography of physical models that were very tactile and very material rich. So I think that's, if I think of what I have done with the students last year, working in India and developing new materials that are being produced there, it's almost the version of that I did already 20 years ago, but in a setting that allows that to be amplified. So
Yeah.
it went from a workshop where I was the audience and we were exploring to now an audience that has become global, that is now reaching different countries, in particularly in the global south.
Yeah, I was going to ask, where did you get this inspiration of social issue architecture? But now it's very clear that you had it from your childhood. um, Coming to the education that you do, obviously, me and Pedro went through it. What do you think education gets right in terms of what do you need to learn in architecture, rather than are universities preparing students to be ready for a job in terms of the skill set that's required to be an architect, or are they actually teaching students to think as an architect?
Good question. I think that yes, schools are aiming to prepare thinkers and critical thinkers. However, I don't think that all the architectural students want to be critical thinkers. So I think that there is a difference between what sometimes students perceive as what an architect role can be in society and what educators aim that that role can become. And I think that bridging that gap is a bit challenging, because then you get students that often don't engage with topics that we think are relevant, and that if you don't engage with them when you are studying, it's going to be very unlikely that you can engage with them later on. So I think that university should equip you with tools that you won't be able to acquire later on. You can perfect them and you can learn new ways of doing it, but the 100 books that you will read during your education and the 100 architects that you will meet, I think those are unique to you. And if those are not curated in a way that they facilitate the dialogue with society, with environment, with solutions that can be innovative and address issues that we are facing in the profession nowadays, I don't think those skills are able to be acquired after. So I think that you can easier prepare yourself for the softwares or the representation or the workflows that you will need to face in practice later on. But your critical thinking is something that is very difficult to acquire if you don't include that as part of the curriculum. So we see a lot of universities, and we are having programs that are preparing technologists, people that are able to operate the software very well and that are able to build a 3D model that has as much information as you can get in every single component, but there is no critical thinking behind it. It's just an operational, it's just a part of a process, which sometimes, of course, is required, but there are a lot of questions that that particular role is not going to be able to answer or to ask, which sometimes is key. So I think that we should be doing ideally both, but I think by preparing the new generations to become critical thinkers on architecture and to be able to judge the decisions that they take rather than just take those decisions for granted and follow with them. I think that's when you are creating a mass of knowledge and of thought that can make an impact. And probably both of them need to live side by side, but I think that education should defend and should promote that role.
Yeah. Obviously, units like yours force, at least make students think that way. But do you think there are educators actively trying to say, how do you say, write the syllabus in a way to make sure that critical thinking is? Because sometimes when you, as a tutor, when you go approach a student saying, this is the brief, this is where you need to think about this issue that we have, as you said, some students don't want it. Some students just want to be technically sound, right? Most students, we are hoping that students take it the right way. But have you seen anywhere later the student changes? Initially they thought, okay, this is not something that I want to work with, but then later realized, okay, architects should be solving these issues. Have you ever seen something like that?
Yes, I think that also changing the way one thinks about processes and about practice is something that I have experienced very often. I think that working in the UK as an educator and in London in particular, but in universities across the country, most students that we encounter are very often not coming from an educational system that we are familiar with. We have, as you know, UEL has a large cohort of students from India. We have this year students that are coming from Sri Lanka, Malaysia, different educational systems that very often they are following post-colonial educational systems, and they are based on, in the case of India, very often they are based on universities in the UK 50, 60 years ago curriculum. And when they come, then they get surprised because they need to answer questions that they never had to answer before. They need to start thinking of who are they designing for, who are they going to engage with, how is that process of involving a user group going to inform the massing and the spaces that you want to design or that you don't want to design because it's completely different from what you thought initially. And I think that they struggle is a challenge, and our discussions that is sometimes it's not straightforward to have, and you need to spend time making that case of why do you think that as an architect you can have those conversations and those interests. But once they learn that value and once they incorporate that into their design thinking process, it becomes super strong because they have already technical qualities that they have acquired in their countries when often they come with their bachelor and with the master already finished. And then when that social aspect gets embedded into their skill set, then it becomes a completely different way of architect delivering projects. And I very often have students that come back and after they have graduated, they say like, this has made me see architecture with a different lens. And now I see projects in a different way as well. And I present projects in a different way. So I think that there is, at the moment, I think that there is almost a need for a discourse that is around social and environmental sustainability that very often is not embraced in countries where perhaps some students are focused on delivering architecture as if it was a product rather than thinking it as if it was a social compound from the beginning of the process. So to me, seeing that transformation is really rewarding. And you, Stefano, you might have experienced part of that journey as well. But now thinking of some of our former students from India that started, they came from India, they studied in the UK, they practiced in the UK for a few years and then went back to India. And now they are doing work that is completely different from anyone else developing there. And they are very successful, and they are able to um, share their opinion and share their voices with policymakers, with educators locally, and they are creating a change. So I think that when that happens, to me is really rewarding. Although, as you said, not everybody is interested in it, so you need to also make sure that you allow for that level of technicality that you were saying, but you can be social on your technical details as well. So I
Yeah,
think that
yeah, exactly.
one thing is
You
not
can
relevant
develop
to
a
the other.
nice detail and make everyone happy. You
That's it.
can make your client happy. I'm just gonna let's just take a bit seriousness out of it because it's been really intense already. I'm just gonna ask, what is the most funny mistake that you've seen a student make in your class? Like
Oof.
you've been thinking, oh my God, why is the student doing that? Have you ever? I
Well,
mean, it's probably me, probably.
no, I think I have a very good story for this one, and you both
Uh-huh.
know the
Go
experience.
ahead.
So when before the digital submissions took over all the universities, there was submission in paper. So
Yeah.
you had this kind of beautiful printed portfolio that you could touch and you could smell, and you could like even damage it with a finger if you didn't like the part of the section. So
Yeah.
it was something that was live until the very last minute when you actually handed the folder. And I think it was back in the year when we were working in Benidorm, which is a city, a very touristic city in the south of Spain, where almost half of the UK goes there on holidays to drink more than they should and sing in karaoke's and not engage at all with the local community because everything is all inclusive and there is nothing there that interests them other than the British culture, but based in a place where there is sun. So we asked the students to kind of reconsider the role of hotels and touristic agents in this process and try to propose models where locals could meet the tourists with different settings, whether it was co-hosting or whether it was incorporating some units within the hotels where you could stay there and maybe meet a
Mm-hmm.
local as
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah. I think
experience.
I've seen it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we had incredible set of proposals, a lot to do with the way users were in Benidorm. We went there with a study trip. And then at the end of the year, we asked all the students to produce a 1 to 50 model that
Mm-hmm.
would represent that essence. So
Mm-hmm.
students were doing surfing boards in their models. They were drawing the grains of a paella dish to a level of detail that will really transmit what they experience in Benidorm. But then this particular student had the structure of the model completely wrong. So the whole roof structure, instead of the beams facing the direction of the slope of the roof, they were perpendicular, which meant that even the model was almost collapsing. And I asked the students, can you please fix this? You have 2 hours. It's very easy. Just remove the beams, put them in the right place, and forget about all the other elements that you are adding, which, yes, they are bringing Benidorm to the model, but the structure is not working. So I had this conversation and it was completely pointless. The model was fully decorated, was beautiful. You could feel that you were in Benidorm, but the structure was not there. So that was a last minute change that I had to do. I just said, okay, just go out of the room. I will fix it myself. I fixed
Oh,
the
is it?
model.
Did you actually have to go into the model yourself?
Yes, yeah, I did it myself because it was an impossible discussion to have. So we always laugh about this anecdote, but I think that it was in a way it was a bit this like the model was able to bring you to Benidorm, which that's a very good thing to have in a
That's a
project.
very
If you
good thing. Yeah.
travel with a project, that means that the project is doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not standing, so,
Yeah.
so it was we had to make a compromise between the two. And at the end, I think we got both of them. But I think that maybe thanks to me being a bit more stubborn, that I should have.
Mm-hmm. That's good because that reminded me of my old time as well. Because even in my first year of bachelor's, I had to submit for first 3 years. We had to submit the physical portfolio. It reminded me of that. Oh my God, that was so tough. Just to do the borders itself took days. That was
Yes,
fun.
but in a way, I think that people learn to value drawing more and the value of every line that you
Mm-hmm.
were making. I think now there is both in practice and in academia, there is an overproduction, which often doesn't lead to better results. So because it's easy to produce and easy to print, you just have more GAs, more drawings, more details. Whereas before, with the key drawings and the key details, you were able to probably, because they were very carefully curated and they were very well related to each other. I'm thinking of the drawings of Enrique Miralles at the very beginning, where he will combine 5 different scales, and you will have from a side plan at 1 to 500 to a 1 to 5 detail, everything in one beautiful hand-drawn A1. And it was just a composition-wise, it was a masterpiece. And now everything gets really, okay, these are your 5 side plans, 5 side analysis, 20 GAs, and 200
It's just
details.
drag and drop, drag and drop, drag and drop.
Yes. And
Exactly.
sometimes people are even kind of compartmented into these scales. So like you do this side plan, you do it very well, you always do side plans. Whereas I think that kind of takes you a bit away from, like, if you draw it by hand and put it on a piece of paper and think about composition, you are getting skills that are not only to do with learning how to print from a plotter, but also how to present the work in a different way. So I kind of miss that. And we always ask the students to, alongside the digital submission, to present 2 or 3 printed pieces that are a bit more curated, which I think is a good balance.
Obviously, sorry, I forgot to mention in the intro, you've obviously worked with Big, MVRDV, and KPF. Regarding the topic that you just said, have you seen, I mean, we always say students struggle to convert education into the practice and the things, how they miss out the transition between the values from the education to the values to the practice. Have you seen how young students nowadays learned how to move into that specifically? Have they really understood the difference between education and practice? Since already now that you said nowadays it's over the production, everything is fast. Now is the time to actually think about, okay, what are we doing? Rather than I don't need to worry about printing my A0 drawings in a this overproduction. Maybe this is the time for young students to think more about how to connect between the university and the practice. Have you seen that happen?
I have seen it on probably a small scale practices, which they still have a relationship with the university and with graduates that work for practices that maybe they have, even if they are smaller and they need to do more work individually, but they have a bit more of time to talk and to gather and to discuss and to organize visits. And most of the practices that we welcome in the university, in the lab, that want to see what are we doing in terms of material innovation, they are typically small scale practices that are having projects where maybe they can spend a bit more of time, and maybe whenever they have a bit more budget, they want to try something new, we try to make it work with them. And we have a program at the university, which is the construction workshops that you are familiar with because you both were part of one, where practices take students and they build with them for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on the program, something tangible that can be used then for the practice. So that is research that benefits both the university and the practice. And we have done that often with a lot of success. And I think that reaching that gap, then the students see how the value of what they are doing in academia can directly have an impact on the way we practice. And I think that that's been very successful. And that model is something that we are trying to champion at the university. Larger practices, it really depends on the ambition and how much time and effort they put into their research and into the development of new knowledge within the practice. Because big practices, as you know very well, very often they are just in a sort of loop where they just reuse ideas from previous projects, transform them into other, and to bring something new into this loop is quite difficult because they think that what they are doing is the right thing. Clients like what they have done before, and they just try to do versions of that here and there. I'm not thinking of Bofill in Tirana now doing a copy of La Muralla Roja, which was built in Spain over 50 years ago. And now that seems modern, but it's just the same building. It's just that because that loop has not finished yet, it's still, and bringing something new into these practices, it becomes challenging. This said, many of them are also open to collaborations and to hear new ideas, but typically is going to impact less the way they operate than when a small practice comes and sees the work or engages with the student in a different way. I can give you two examples. One was a collaboration that we did with the Studio Bark, which they studied at UEL, and they created a kind of startup looking at the U-Build system, a modular system that allows you to create your own extensions, your own home, and allow for that degree of self-buildability, but also modifications of the future. And we have a group of students that were with them working for 2 weeks developing cladding options for one project, and then one of those options was then implemented in the building. So there was research integrated, there was a component of design, a hands-on, lot of testing, and then the actual cladding of the building. And I think that gave the students the impression that, okay, we are doing this work, we are doing this design at this scale, and it's having a direct application on a project, and then it can be replicated in other projects of the practice. So it becomes part of that catalog that is already there for them. And the students were really, really pleased by the experience. And one of them went to work with the practice later on and kind of brought part of that knowledge. And I think that made it an easier transition. Not only it's not about preparing the students to say, okay, you need to use these particular softwares and you need to do it in this particular way. It's more like try to learn how the practice works, try to understand what are they going to be caring, how do they speak to the clients, how do they present to them, what is a client going to ask, and how you can often it's not about having 20 drawings, it's more about having maybe an object that communicates in a different way, a prototype, a model, or something that reminds them of something that can touch them. And I think that worked really well at that small scale. Another collaboration that we did, completely different practice, with Grimshaw Architects, also very successful. We developed a prototype for a slab that could be demounted and then mounted again with no mortar using locking geometries, and the students engage with the practice. But in this case, the practice, we didn't engage directly. We didn't go to the practice. Rather, the practice brought some of the knowledge to the university.
Oh, was it
And I
like
think
that?
yeah, the dialogue became a bit different because they were not able to, they didn't immerse themselves into the experience
Yeah.
of the practice.
Did they had to use these materials? Did they get to use this in their project?
No, it was an experimental prototype, but it was not with the direct application into a project that they wanted to do. It was more, okay, we have some time, we have some resources, let's do something that kind of ticks the boxes of environmental and sustainability for the practice, which it was perfectly fine and it worked very well for us. But I think the other model where a small practice has a project that already is on site and it needs at that particular moment research on something specific, I think that became really applicable, and then the students could really see how you explain to a client that cladding that you have developed can be the right solution, and this is how you draw it, this is how you install it, and these are the benefits that it has. So I think that often is where in the stage and the way you communicate and how much layering it exists, because in a large practice like Grimshaw, you will never directly speak with the
Yeah.
client, whereas
Yeah.
if it's a small practice, everything is much more fluid.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the scale. And then, as you very well know, even within large practices, you have so many outputs that you can get, and you can be working in so many different scales, so many different departments, working groups, that often to be prepared for all of it is almost impossible. And often people get labeled, which
Yeah.
is something that is
Yeah.
a bit
It's
tricky,
it's it's
because you
hard to
can,
stick away from the label, actually.
it's very difficult. And that's
Yeah.
why one of the things that we always encourage our students when they are about to finish is like, try to avoid saying, I'm really good at this, or I really enjoy doing that. Like, test first.
What should
Because
they
if you
say
get
then?
labeled into, you are really good into collages, then you will be doing collages for
Yeah.
10 years if you continue to practice. So I think that is like getting a bit away from I'm very specialized into that particular area, rather than this is the way I operate, and I can then transform that depending where I'm developing a 1-to-5 detail or a site plan, but it's more a way of understanding working processes.
And talking about the slab, let's talk about Sugarcrete. For the audience who doesn't know what Sugarcrete is, can you please explain what Sugarcrete is and what's been the work that you've been doing and where did it all begin?
Of course. Yeah. So I think that is part of an agenda that we have set up, as you were mentioning before, about social and environmental narratives, and trying to incorporate as much as possible a certain degree of innovation into the curriculum, by asking students questions that maybe are a bit difficult to address and that not always are successful, but can become drivers for the project. So in this case, it was a year that we were working in the Royal Docks, and the main question that we asked the students is like, can you explore what are the byproducts that are produced in an area that before was very industrial and that before was fully isolated from the communities because it was fenced by a wall and the industry was just working towards the docks. So can we find industries that maybe can do the opposite? So instead of working from the out to the docks, from the docks out, and that way engage communities in a dialogue with those industries. And then we look at industries that were operating in that way, which was more than we would have thought. Smaller scale industries, large scale industries, but that had a component of community aspect into it. And we got in touch with Tate and Lyle, which has one of the largest refineries of the UK, is based in the Royal Docks, boundary with the River Thames, and they had a clubhouse called the Tate Institute that operated.
Clubhouse.
It was a house for the workers.
Okay.
So it was a house, like it was a house where workers could go there with their families. There was a lot of social activity around it, and they wanted to promote that social aspect through getting employees the opportunity to meet after work. And it was a mix of a pub, a community center, but it closed with the transformation of the industry in the docks, and it's been vacant since. So the first one of the students approached the brief saying, okay, I want to work a bit with this community club that is abandoned, and I want to try to use byproducts that are generated with that industry to do some sort of retrofit. And initially it didn't fully work, but we thought that there was something very interested into that idea of linking both of them together. And that year, some of the students started to look at some byproducts from sugar and how to transform them into construction materials. So we thought, okay, I think that the project submitted, the student didn't really fully develop the material exploration as much as we would have liked it, but there was something there already. So we didn't abandon the idea there. We didn't let it we encouraged that the student continue that development in the next year and say, okay, that was very interesting. We are changing the brief, but can you keep an eye on this material development? And the student did. So on the second year, we developed the first prototypes. We started working with byproducts that were provided by Tate and Lyle. So that was the first partner that we had. And we created the first cubes. And we realized that we were working very well. They were able to replace bricks in many applications. And we kind of took that idea over the summer period and developed it further in one of the construction workshops. So we said, okay, this has potential. Let's bring a bit of research into it. So rather than being just a speculative student idea, let's bring it through the lab. So that, I think that component, like kind of going between studio and laboratory that can validate the material, that was where I think the most successful transition was. And that validation is not certification. It's slightly different. This is validating by us having a torch of fire and putting the torch of fire close to the material and saying, this doesn't burn. And I can be here for like 20 minutes. It's not burning. And when we did that, the workshop technician, that was a ceramic artist, Mark, you remember, he was extremely knowledgeable. He touched the material from the back without gloves. Even if I didn't dare touching it with the gloves, he touched it without gloves and said, like, I have never seen a material perform like this. You know, like you are for 20 minutes on one side and the other side is fully cold. So he said, there is something very interesting here. So us talking to people that were using materials that behave around fire very often, ceramics, metal melting, and having that input directly from them. I think that's in a way that became super rich. And I think that's one of the unique qualities of the project, that is not being developed by an architectural studio. It's been developed by a cohort of material scientists, engineers, architects, product designers, photographers. A lot of people have been involved across the years, and it's not been owned. From the beginning, we decided not to run a patent, not to protect the technology. Everything is published on the website. And then the students just take it 1 year, develop it a bit further, put it on hold, continue with it, find other agricultural waste where you can use the same formula and then transform it into something else.
So
So
it's
it
an
has become,
open
in a way,
source.
yes, it has become an open source resource that the university uses internally and the students use internally, and that makes it evolve. So somebody applies for funding and then comes back saying, I got a bit of funding. Can we now taste taifa? Kind of fast growing plants that grow in the UK in marsh areas, and now we are
Mm-hmm.
testing taifa to do something similar. Or
Oh, is it?
somebody's
Okay.
interested in corn production, so say, I have a lot of corn where I come from. Can we try something different? So like it kind of branches out, and something that started linear, just as one single line, now it has branched out into maybe 200 different outputs. Some of them we control, others we don't control. So there are, like, we just got an email today from Ecuador. They are setting up their facility and they want some assistance, but they have bought the machinery already and we didn't know. So like that in a way is extremely rewarding, because the technology, what the main thing that wants to do is to sequester carbon. So when these plants are growing, they are absorbing all this carbon from the atmosphere, and that's burned typically. So what we want to sequester that carbon, but I can explain that with a bit more of detail. So I think that in terms of how Sugarcrete was created, was that kind of transition between a studio, laboratory, back to
Mm-hmm.
the studio, and then testing it in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Then
I
it goes
see.
back to the laboratory. So
Yeah.
it's a loop. It's not
Yeah.
a linear trajectory.
Obviously, making this material is a technological feat. Although, what's your thought about how material specifically impacts architecture in terms of how it makes us feel things? We have spaces, plaster painted walls, or stone cladded walls, or bagasse walls. How does that change things? What do you think about it?
Well, I think that first, yes, maybe to put a bit on context of what materials mean to me. So
Mm-hmm.
I worked for almost 15 years in different architectural practices in, as you mentioned before, in Copenhagen, Rotterdam, and then in London. And particularly towards the last years when I was full time in practice, most of the work that I was doing had to do with material detailing, material selection, and material development. And it's surprising and a bit scary how limited the material palette that we use in architecture is. Doesn't really matter whether we were making a project in India, in Saudi Arabia, in the UK, in Spain. The materials that you would use were the same. You will detail them in the same way, and you will expect them to behave in the same way as well. I'm talking, of course, about concrete brick, metal,
Yeah.
aluminum
Steel,
cladding,
glass. Yeah.
plasterboard,
Yeah.
and different type of glazing, which with that, you kind of create 95% of the buildings that we have nowadays. And most of them are very poor performing, and they are not adapted to their local context. So we have seen projects being built in India with no insulation and no notion of why insulation can be required,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
using bricks.
I absolutely struggled when I moved to the UK. I saw insulation, these wiggly lines. I'm like, what is that?
Sad? No.
I didn't have any clue.
Why do we need that?
Exactly. Why do we need that between the walls?
Yeah, and using practices that make the space very difficult to inhabit, because then it becomes really warm and really cold in winter. That's maybe the most radical example, no? But then you see spaces that are fully built using reinforced concrete walls, plasterboard, insulation, like all the different technical layers that we have, where then acoustics are horrible. You get reverberation times that are 10 times higher than what you will need. And I'm talking about auditoriums, I'm talking about student accommodation or student facilities where you expect a certain level of careness around how we talk to each other and how we perceive sound. And there is no, because that material palette doesn't allow that to happen. It relies on furniture, soft furniture, carpets, covering the walls with kind of fancy feature panels that can address that problem, where there's a big material palette that can already do that for you. So I think that, like, asking the material what it wants to do and how it should do it, I think that might be the first thing that we should ask ourselves. And I think that one of the benefits of working with bio-based materials and trying to use them in your projects is that they can promote healthier spaces for the users. And in many cases, they are able to contribute towards passive cooling and passive heating strategies on buildings, whereas conventional materials, high energy materials, very often struggle a lot with this negotiation because they're not permeable. They don't allow the air or the humidity to circulate through them, which is fantastic in some cases, but in other cases there might be certain benefits on allowing your wall to breathe. So when we build the first building that we built with Sugarcrete in India that we are now monitoring is going to finish a 1-year cycle of monitoring. We are monitoring humidity levels in that building compared to a control room that is built fully with concrete blocks and is rendered with cement internally. And the humidity levels are completely different for the same amount of users, because the wall that is able to breathe and that is designed to breathe is taking that humidity and then is able to slowly transfer that humidity or keep that humidity until the environment changes. And people that are using the building are really pleased on how different they are experiencing that building compared to the classroom that they normally use. Additionally, with acoustic benefits and better acoustic performance as well. And I think that this, like, kind of thinking of how can we, through the material, improve the way we use the space and the way the space behaves, minimizing how much do we need to add into it. I think that's something that we don't ask ourselves often enough. And also particularly in areas on the global south where most of the growth is going to happen in terms of built area. So we talk about a lot of biomaterials in Europe. Yes, we are using a lot of timber, we are using a lot of hempcrete, we are trying to promote those materials a lot, but this is not where we are going to build. Europe is going to be insignificant compared to the built area that is happening already and is going to happen in India, in Africa, in Latin America. That's where the main difference happens. And that's where we are getting the most interest, because they are seeing that they are just using bricks and concrete. Timber is not even available in many of those regions because, for instance, in Africa, we are now doing a project in Guinea-Bissau. There is no timber available because everything is bought by European and Chinese companies to produce high-end timber products in their own countries. So it's not available
Paneling,
there.
cladding.
Yeah, cladding or furniture, or because they perform very well externally. So they are timbers that they have a different price tag. So they don't have manufacturing facilities. Case in Zanzibar, they have been publishing this new development using timber in many magazines and promoting them as a sustainable way of building. But when you look at it deep, all the CLT that is being produced is coming from Austria, and the houses were designed in Germany. And the timber was originally from Finland, which it makes you think, is this the right solution?
It's a long way to come.
Can we call that sustainable if it needs to travel across the world and be imported from, or are we just reinforcing narratives of post-colonial sustainability? So I think that this idea that we can maybe work with what we have where we have it and try to upcycle certain products using techniques that have been used for centuries. So line rendering, as we are suggested that we use for the walls, is something that has been there in India, was used when you visit the Red Fort and the old kind of beautiful historical buildings in India. All of them, they have a lime kiln internally. So they were producing their own lime and they were
it's very
their own
local.
wood.
Yeah.
It's very local. It's very local and it's ancestral, vernacular technologies that are already there.
Yeah.
So when we ask people to do it, now they have lost that ability. It's very difficult to find people that can produce a very good line rendering, which you require for that wall to breathe. So I think maybe that's what the architecture school should teach students, no? Like the
Yeah, yeah,
value
yeah.
of these
I
techniques
completely
that,
agree with you. Yeah, I
yeah.
completely agree with you. Especially all those traditional buildings. When you think about it, it took forever to build, and which was a good thing now then you think about it, because when industrialization came about, we thought, okay, now it's going to be much easier, much faster to make things, and world's going to be nice. But actually speeding things up made it worse somehow, which doesn't make sense. Slowing down was nicer. Thinking about where the material comes from. Okay, let's make it local because we can't go anywhere else. We didn't have the technology, but now that we have the technology, we tend to misuse it. if yeah,
And I think there is so much knowledge there
yeah,
that is a pity that we think that that knowledge is not valid, or it has less validity than knowing the U value of your triple glazing. That's like the best thing that you can do, or building with your 25 different layers from internal to external. That's the right way of detailing. Whereas before, Adobe Wall was just the Adobe. Render externally, render internally. It does everything that you need it to do. It performs acoustically, thermally, and for fire. So it kind of, on one move, you are creating and replacing all those layers. And of course, they are technologies that they need to be used when they are appropriate. You cannot use them in certain settings. But I think that the fact that architectural practices, like, I think they are now starting to consider it, but for many years, there has been no discourse on going beyond that material palette. So I think that now the new generations are coming with these questions and this interest and these narratives. And I think there is a transition. Europe is leading the way, definitely, with legislation towards that change. So now in many countries, there is a percentage of the building that needs to be bio-based. So people are more and more looking at which products are available, which is great. But I think that that should become the way we perceive what the new teaching and new pedagogy can bring, how we can address that gap that exists at the moment.
yeah. That makes me question how many of these architects around the world actually think about the consequences that they do. They choose a material or they go design a building, and how many of them actually think about the consequences? You
Mm.
never know.
No, I mean, I think now more and more you need to provide your life cycle assessment. Is going to impact your BREEAM certification. Is going to impact the way the building performs. So people are conscious that is something that you need to be taken into account, into consideration. But I think very often there is lack of alternatives. So at the end, you say, like, what can I use that is certified, that we can get insurers to back? Because that's another issue. You can have the best biomaterial creation in the world, but if nobody's going to insure it, then you won't be able to use it or to implement it. So how do you get to that level that is that people can trust that it can be used? That's I think that's where we are now, and that's a
Yeah,
part that becomes
is
more
that
challenging.
the most exciting part of the industry right now when you think about the future of architecture? Looking forward, with what makes you happy?
I think definitely. I think that the prospect that we can change to some extent the way we are building, and that we can include materials and strategies and construction methods that are, on the one side, they are more careful, they are context-based, and they are going dialogue with the communities or with the societies where this is going to happen. And you might struggle at first, as we are doing in many countries. But for instance, India has been a beautiful example of a country that is has an anger for, like, it's really looking for improvement and is looking for innovation. And when they saw that we were doing blocks with sugarcane, they are the second producer in the world. They said, like, we want to do it. And we are now in conversations with the Ministry of Education, where new schools can use that material. We are working with NGOs in plantations with communities that are working with the cane, and they can produce these blocks and then get some additional income on the 6 months where the harvesting stops. Because a lot of crops, they are seasonal. So there is 6 months where they do a lot of work, but then 6 months where they need to wait. So kind of finding new work opportunities for those periods and creating a sense of this is not like this vernacular knowledge that can be combined now with some innovation that is being validated and is being certified, can create something new. To me, that's extremely exciting. And I think that when I see how this materializes and when you then hear the new generations talking about it, when we were in India last year, we went to open one of the Sugarcrete center buildings that we co-designed with the University of Delhi. I got students from the college that came to me to explain me how good the building was and how good the material that was used for the Indian society would be, without knowing that we were from the university. And to me, that was really, it was really rewarding. Just to see them super excited, like explaining to you that we have built this, we have used our own agricultural byproducts to create it. It's a new product. It's going to change the market. It might not happen, but just seeing like how the new generation is embracing it and are going away from the thinking of no, these are not bricks, it's not going to be strong enough. It was completely different. Like it was like they have been using it for a certain time already and they have learned the benefits of that material and now they were defending it in a way that it was unthinkable for us 3 years ago.
And how would you think the goal is now for Sugarcrete, especially from the innovation, the testing, exploring the material, and obviously testing the actual building in India. And then, as you said, like you're going through now some talks with the Ministry of Education. And so, how do you see the material now become for the coming years?
Yeah, we're trying to open as much as possible the applications. So we are working with product designers, we are working with architects, with engineers, with artists that want to experience how it could be used for different things, for not only for doing blocks. We are working with a designer in the south of Spain, in Granada, to create acoustic panels or thermal panels that can be used to retrofit internally houses that have very little insulation or that are not performing as good as they should, for which there is a lot of funding available in the European Union. So that's kind of one stream of work where we are saying, okay, let's try to make an impact on a market that is already pushing for those materials instead of with a material that will be used to build new constructions, something that can retrofit the existing house stock. In India, it's completely different. It's more like we will need X millions of bricks per year. Can we replace a percentage with a material that performs better than a brick in many aspects? Of course, it might not be able to carry the same load, so you might not use it for the same applications, but you might be able to still use it for a lot of applications for which the bricks maybe are not the right solution at the moment. In Latin America, we are working with companies that want to establish it there, in Costa Rica, in Ecuador, in Mexico, companies that have started to work with something similar, very often creating prefabricated panels that are maybe reinforced with either a very thin metal structure or timber structure, and then they have sugarcrete inside, compressed. So there we are more acting as a consultancy where they said, okay, we have this problem. Can you help us? You have done already this testing. We have already done the testing in the laboratory. So we receive their samples, we do the testing, and then we advise which path to follow. So I think that in a way is not us taking all the load, and we don't want to do bricks. What we want is to spread the technology and to spread the knowledge as much as possible. I think we are doing that in different ways. So depending whether it's a commercial opportunity, it's a social opportunity, it's academic opportunity, we need to adapt to each one, and we are embracing all of them. So we are trying to be flexible on the way we work as well. And then the final one that we are developing now, Pedro, answering your question, we are looking into how to validate carbon credits out of the technology. So as I mentioned before, when you work with byproducts that they, especially fast-growing plants like sugarcane, hemp, bamboo, or other agricultural fast-growing elements, because they grow that fast, they sequester a lot of carbon. And the last study that we have just published in the university is to do with all the agricultural waste that is available. So if all that agricultural waste, that most of it at the moment has very little commercial value, was used for construction materials, and you could lock that carbon into construction materials, you could compensate for all the CO2 that the cement industry produces, which is around 8% of the whole CO2 that we are producing in the world, which is not legal. And that's a waste that is there. It's already available. It has very little value. You can add value into it, and you can lock the carbon that it has. So that's a massive amount. And if you couple that with the fact that there is a carbon credit market, which we might not fully agree with the way it operates, but it exists, which means that if you can prove that you are locking that carbon in a block, somebody can buy that carbon from you. You go into a market with that carbon credit, and a company that is emitting carbon in the UK can buy that carbon from you when you are locking it with a block in India. And we are doing that exercise now with the first building, with the school that we have done. We are very close. It's the first time that an innovative material goes through that process. So we are working with companies that are used to being the first time on something, which is also not easy. Not everybody's open.
Yeah, there's
to do
always
that.
a first time. Someone's got to do it.
Yeah. And the first thing that we are doing, we need to create a testing regime that can certify that the material would last for 35 years. That's the life expectancy that is asked for the carbon credits. And then you need to couple it with a life cycle assessment. So you have to explain how the carbon is locked and how you are going to keep it. And then you prove with photography of the building that you have done the right thing, and you can sell the credits. It's not a lot of money for Western standards, but in India, it could offset half of the cost of the production of the block, which means that then the block is cheaper than a brick. So it's also, if we manage to get it right and to do it right and to share the fact that we have done it, then other people that might be interested in the technology can just follow the same path, because if it works once, you just need to adapt the data to other
And
regions.
when the scale is bigger, it gets cheaper.
That's it. You scale it up,
Yeah.
it gets cheaper, and
Yeah.
it gets more efficient. So you use less carbon to produce it, which means that you are storing more carbon, and then you can get more credits. So I think we are, I don't know if I have answered the question better, but we are working in different streams at the moment. And when I was talking about these 200 branches, I was not exaggerating. We have around 200 projects that are now live, and that are ranging from different scales, different partners, and that, to me, that becomes really rewarding. I have, as you know, very limited time for my research as part of my allocation at the university, so I have made my teaching part of that research as well. And last year, the brief for the students was to design a community center in India built with bamboo and sugarcrete. And we had 20 excellent designs produced by Master of Architecture students who traveled to India, met the NGO, had an incredible experience in Hisar, meeting the community that was going to use the building, meeting people that are working with the bricks, using cow dung and soil to create long-lasting blocks, meeting the bamboo plantation owners that were very excited about using the bamboo for it. So it was a transformational trip. And I think that the students got an incredible experience out of it, of working with the community, working with new materials, and designing a building that one of the proposals is going to be built, is going to start in November next year, which for a year 4 of architecture student, that is the student in the is quite an opportunity. Yeah.
That's what was going to be my next question in terms of, for example, as you're saying, it's rewarding to have all these projects getting built and be used perhaps as a case study, because as you mentioned, there's a few funds on the European Union, and how does that relate with UK not being part of the European Union? Is that still funds available for this kind of materials? And how is you think will be like to put in a residential property, for example? Because I guess then it will be difficult to it's like a dialogue with the customer, or the in terms of how do you think to put this material in your house? But by the way, is a new biomaterial, blah blah. Do you think is that like a duty as well from the architect to push these kind of sustainability materials to their clients? And pursue them in a way to use it, although they still new. But the good thing, as you've mentioned as well, is like it's 200 plus projects being built, and that already gives a bit of case study and proof of the building of the material.
Yeah, and not all those projects are necessarily building as we understand. Some of them are experiments, some of them are prototypes, some of them are furniture, some of them are art installations. So I think that they range a lot on the application, but that means that you are exploring more potential. And so in south of Spain, we are working with a designer in Barcelona doing lamps out of a Sugarcrete, which she was already looking into using it for beautiful lamp shades and beautiful acoustic panels. So we are collaborating with her, and this was a European Union fund, but most of the funding that is available is open to the UK as well.
Okay.
So even though the UK is not part of the European Union anymore, but there is a lot of funding, which it includes countries that are still in relationship with the European Union. So in this case, it was a grant that was linking young designers with institutes, and the Institutes of Sustainability of the university paired with the designer in Barcelona and got a grant to develop a product. So the institute can validate it and the designer can then produce some prototypes that then can go into market. And I think that was a very good example of how to create a product that is market ready. So as you said, people can install them in their house. In this case, it was a retrofit panel. So it's a panel that you install internally. And we are finishing now testing that it will lead into CE marking certification. So we are hopeful that in the next year, when we finish all the testing, is something that you could already buy and it will be fully certified. But I don't think that that's how you will enter the market. I think that what we are getting more like larger opportunities is developers that are coming with an interest on testing it as something a bit experimental. So we are now in conversations with a developer in Portugal, actually in Algarve, in the south of Portugal, that wants to build it's kind of an eco resort of 200 villas, and he wants to use 3 different bio-based materials. One hempcrete that is already producing in Portugal, another one timber frame combined with a straw bale, similar to what you use in your project, actually, Pedro, in your final project in the Master of Architecture at UEL, and then the other third of the houses he wants to use Sugarcrete. So he wants to really explore the 3 of them and want to make it as a part of the marketing of the development. Not every developer might have the same way of thinking, but you can see more and more that there is a trend towards acknowledging that innovation has a value and that bio-based materials, they can add value to the development and that there is a market for it. So I think that we're really pleased when we get this type of offers, because maybe it's not what we will commercially, it's not exactly where we want to be, because it's not the aim that we have, but we understand that you need to have these conversations and make sure that that can be facilitated for the project to be successful. And for instance, when you develop your project, Pedro, at your year 5, using this kind of straw bale structure that was very beautifully developed and that was able to cantilever, which typically you always think of 1-2 stories. You took it one level up and did it in a way that was pushing the stone further while not compromising the architecture that you wanted to create. I think that was a very good example of where we want to be with Sugarcrete as well. Like we want that is embraced and that students of architecture can take ideas that we have on the website or on other projects that they see and make them theirs. And then because that's when you really explore the capacity. The explorations that you did, for instance, I have never seen it built yet. But now more and more you see projects using that construction system in Europe.
Okay.
So it might be that in 5 years that gets built.
Yeah.
And then you would say, I thought about it.
And so when it comes these opportunities of these developers to build something, how do you position yourself in these projects? Do you then just share the information about these materials and you work as, like, for example, a consultant, or you actually the one, say, the leader architect that will help them design the building with these materials, like being actually involved with the project?
It ranges. I think we are doing both, actually.
Okay.
So this development in in the south of Portugal, they already had a design. So what they asked us was to advise on how the design would need to be modified to embrace the material. So what are like we always advise, if you can create overhangs, if you can lift it from the ground to a certain height, what Mark was always saying, if you have a good hat and you have good boots, then biomaterials are going to be happy. So we always try to remember the wise words of an artist that work at the university with these materials for many years. And that's our recommendation, basically. Of course, we explain it in a bit more technical way, but that's the essence.
Yeah.
So we did some modifications to the design, and we suggested some modifications that they embrace to some extent. Of course, you can make it work if that's not the case. And you can also make it work for a flat roof with no overhangs, but obviously then the maintenance regime will be different. So we kind of tested both of them, but there it was more, we are acting as a consultancy. We have a commercial partner that wants to develop that. We have a fee, so you can cover the time. So we can buy our time from the university. So we are, the university is non-for-profit organization, so we are not looking into creating profit with it, but we want to subsidize, of course, our time, our research, and if we get any additional income, then we can do further testing, so the research can be pushed. So that part of the income that we get through grants or through consultancy always gets reinvested into research outputs. And then the other one is where we are involved as designers as well, and where we co-design these buildings with partners. And that's what we did in India, for instance, with the first Sugarcrete building. We did a co-design exercise where we involved the students. We were involved as well ourselves, local architects in India, and then we kind of co-produce the building, the construction system, the detailing, and we were involved in the building of it as well. And now with this community center that we designed with the students last year, we are now kind of taking one of the designs and transform it into something that can be built in the local context, and we are involved with the design in collaboration always with the local architect and local engineers. But there we are kind of having a design role that we don't have in other projects. So I think that we kind of have learned to wear different hats. So sometimes we are trying to put ourselves in a place, okay, we are researchers and we develop a research project to improve the material. Sometimes we are designers and we propose visuals and we create drawings that can make people dream and can help people fundraise. And this is something that in India, for instance, has been quite important. When we are there and we show a design that we have contributed towards, people in a way, they change their mindset. And when we did a trip with 8 students, we showed the work, we raised a lot of awareness of what we were doing. They managed to fundraise enough to buy the whole site on those days that we were there.
Wow.
So I think that there is also the perception of like, if we get people that are working with it involved beyond the consultancy or beyond the kind of the testing on the lab, but they actually go to site and they show how it could look. In a way, it's you are convincing maybe a different type of audience. No, you are not maybe convincing the academics, but you are maybe convincing people that might be able to contribute towards the development.
Of course. And so, in terms of coming to this position as researching materials and looking back in terms of the big practice that you work on, changing for education, and all these years of experience that you already have, how do you see architecture at the moment and the impact it will have in a couple of years? Not specifically just sustainability, but in general, how architecture is becoming.
Yeah, I mean, I think that compared to when I started practicing back in 2010, 11, I think there is already a completely different narrative around sustainability. So before it was typically an addition that you will include at the end of projects and not something that will be required and that many clients would even consider. Now it's completely different. I think that now there is an understanding that it needs to be incorporated through policy, but also through more and more clients being aware of that being important. because they believe it, but also because if they are going to rent a building, people that are going to rent it, they might pay a prime if the building performs better, if it's a healthier environment, if they are going to reduce their energy bill because there is passive heating and passive cooling system integrated into the building. So I think there is already a change which has to do with how do we design the buildings to be more efficient, to perform better, and more to use materials that are more sustainable in terms of their carbon footprint, but also in terms of where they come from. And I think that there is a big change between where we are in the European context, including the UK, and where other areas where they are building very fast and where they need to build very fast are having those conversations. And I think that we should maybe be looking more into how we can play a role on developing solutions that are scalable to other areas as well, rather than addressing only issues that or materials that can be used locally. Again, going back to timber, it's incredible the way we are using timber nowadays, and you see beautiful structures that are every year we get one more story. We are now already on high-rise level being something quite normal to be built out of timber with CLT mass timber, but that's really localized to where that timber is available, which is very few geographical regions in the world can grow that and have capacity to manufacture in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we should be looking at solutions that are a bit more scalable towards areas that are currently building a lot and are doing it with concrete frame and brick, with, as we said before, very little even narratives around the need of insulation for thermal or for acoustic performance. And I think that if we are able to, maybe through sharing, as we are trying to do, through open source systems or through innovation that can have an impact there, raise awareness that it can be done in a different way, but not only by we are doing it in a different way, more than trying to partner locally to do it differently, which I think is a big difference. Like it's not only, I don't think we are interested in testing it in a context where that's already required and is becoming the norm. We are much more interested in it in a context where that's fully ignored or even considered to be something risky and not being embraced by the society as much. So we are encountering a lot of resistance, of course. So when we talk with a lot of partners in India, the first thing that they say, no, this is going to burn, termites are going to eat it.
Oh, yeah.
This is not going to work. Like if there is a monsoon, it's going to fly away. We said, okay, we have done all the testing. That's not happening. Like, can't you give us a chance? Like, test
Yeah.
it, try it. We have partners in India that are using it already, and you guys used it for centuries until the Brits came and said that brick and concrete was much better.
And then we
So
took it.
I think that kind of change of perception is
Yeah.
a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think if we work together and if you work with partners and if they see that you have already tested, and that's why it's so important to do prototypes and to do the first time, to be the first time that somebody builds with that and try to certify it. And I think that what is important as well is to be serious about it. To be serious about innovation and to be serious about material science. I see a lot of work, you have seen a lot of work in universities as well, where students come with like small samples. Yeah, I did this, I collected eggshells and I created a tile and I use it in my project. Great, I love that idea, but you do like that and it breaks. You put it on fire and it burns. So fine, do it, but be thorough. Like say, what is this material going to do and how does it need to perform? And do it yourself. Put it out of the window. The first thing that we did with Rashmi, as we were saying before, one of your colleagues, we built the block and I asked Rashmi, do you have a balcony? Yes. We're in the UK? Yes. It was winter, it rains, put it out of the balcony. Let's keep it there 1 year. Let's see what happens. And that's what we did. After a year, it was perfectly fine. Weathering, it didn't pass any official weathering testing, but at least we knew that it's not going to disintegrate. So I think that there is a lot of testing that you can almost do in an intuitive way. And I think that by embracing that kind of degree of risk and then partnering with people, communities, clients, companies that want to take that risk because they see a benefit on it and they see that they can change the way the industry is operating at the moment in their countries. I think that's how we can make an impact, or how do we want to make that impact?
Mm-hmm.
Good. I must say this sounds a lot of work. How many people do you have working for you? Because this is a triple full-time job, because it's impossible to reach these lengths and these many countries and the number of audience that you've already. It's been a super success now. Actually, a lot of people know about Sugarcrete, and there's a lot of media attention towards the need of having material like this and the need of going for an application like this. So how do you do it? That's the main question.
We are a very little team with very little time. So I think that we have learned to be very efficient and
Very good.
to make a difference between what's important and what's not, to understand the value of sharing knowledge and to understand how we transfer knowledge in an efficient way. And 2 years ago, we got the Times Higher Education Award for Knowledge Exchange of the Year, Knowledge Transfer Initiative of the Year. They are considered to be the Oscars of higher education in the UK. So we went to the ceremony. Everybody was wearing black tie, and we got the award. It was a very rewarding moment for us. And the award was because they thought that the way we were transferring knowledge was extremely successful, because it went from laboratory to community and it materialized in a built output within a year. And I think that this was a combination of trusting our partners, so sharing the knowledge instead of protecting it, being strategic on who do you partner with, and being able to say, no, this is enough. And also having a team that you can trust back at the university, which that's extremely important. So we are very lucky that we are working with colleagues in the architectural department that are extremely generous, and they are embracing the work that we are doing and supporting it. The same with material science, where we are in the Sustainability Research Institute. All the facilities are available for us. They have said what you are doing, we believe is worth spending time and resources. So we have all the machinery that you can imagine for testing this material available, and we are using that. And then I think that built into a momentum where people got more attraction to it. So we have now PhD students that are coming to the university and want to contribute to it and explore areas that maybe we haven't explored with the same amount of time and dedication. So it's 3 PhD students that are now looking into different outputs of the material. And then we are a team of 3 co-creators, and we are supported, of course, by a team at the university in terms of social media, videography, that is very important as well.
Very
So we have
important. Yeah.
videography at the university that is really good, and they have done a really nice job on sharing that journey.
Yeah, the
We
presentation
also
of it
partner
is very important.
presentation of it,
Yeah.
presenting it professionally. Every year we do a partnership exercise with photography students from UEL, year 5 photography students that they already have a very keen eye on documenting, which maybe we are not able to see it in the same way. And we ask them to come to the studio, and for a week they photograph the work that we are doing. And all the photos that we have in the website, they are done by photography students that then they are credited. And then if the Scene or other magazines are picking up, their name is there, which again, for a year 5 photography student to be featured in the Scene and Arc Daily the same day is quite
Which
special.
is great. Great
It
exposure.
happened last year,
Yeah.
twice. So I think that's also bringing this kind of value of where we are operating. We are cross-disciplinary, and I think something that UAL offers, which speaking with a PhD student the other day, I kind of came to realize is that it's a one-stop shop for innovation. So you have the laboratory where you can test it, but then if you go to the wood workshop, you can build the mold there at no cost using leftovers from other projects. And you have a technician that is also a visual artist operating with timber that is going to help you make the most robust and reusable mold the same day. Then you go back and then you CNC the rest of the mold and put it inside. And again, you have people that are there able to help you. And in one day, you have created a mold that you can use to cast a product. And then that product can be tested the same day or the day after once it's cured in a laboratory doing a test that if you need to outsource it, it will be a cost of probably 5 to 10K, and it will take you a couple of months. So all these processes that can happen within 5 minutes walking distance, the campus, right?
Yeah.
Like from one point, in 5 minutes, you can reach all these
Yeah.
points. If you had to outsource that work,
Yeah, it's
you wouldn't be
impossible.
able to, or you wouldn't be able to do it 10 times. So because we have this we are building this idea of let's try to push innovation and let's try to do this cross-disciplinary use of the workshops to create something special, we are able to have 10 different outputs because it's there and people are doing it and people are learning from other people that have done it already and they just follow the same path. And I think that that's really unique of the way we are operating, both in the facilities, but also the pedagogy that goes behind it of experimenting with the hands, testing, building it one-to-one, and then sharing that knowledge and getting partners to test that knowledge in other areas and co-create that knowledge with them. Once they embrace it, then it's not your intellectual property anymore. That's background intellectual property. It becomes foreground intellectual property, and then it's shared with that partner. And that partner then takes ownership and believes that the project is theirs as well. So I don't think we have a lot of people. We are not a big team, but I
Yeah,
think we have
yeah.
established a way of working
System,
that
yeah.
allows us to run in parallel a lot of projects with us just facilitating them.
That sounds great. I think if you are a student, architecture student right now, this sounds really exciting because I'm pretty sure students right now think the way architecture is moving in the industry, and they might be a bit doubtful and questionable about the industry. We have this reputation, oh, architecture, oh no, don't take architecture, don't come to architecture, there's no money, there's no life. But I think this is very exciting and interesting to students. If someone watches this video, what is one advice that you would give to an architecture student on how to think, or
That's probably I would try to come into the university with an open mind towards experimentation and towards testing. And I think that's degree of freedom that we are trying to encourage the students to embrace and to experiment with, from materials to making techniques to detailing to form finding exercises. I think that the more you embrace that experimental output, and it can be digital, it can be physical, it can combine both of them, but I think that coming with that kind of wish of experimentation and testing and innovating through your own work, I think that creates knowledge in a way that it becomes extremely powerful. So keep your mind open, try to, as much as possible, of course, work with colleagues and learn from what colleagues are already doing and building, and experiment with it. And don't limit yourself to what you hear in lectures or what you see in magazines. Try to break from that and experiment and create your own outputs. And I think that's where you are only able to do that at the university, and you're able to do it there, and you're supported and it's valuable. And that knowledge, and that's even if you might not become the most knowledgeable in all the fields, but if you manage to have a driver that says, I really want to push this for, the knowledge that you will gain by making and materializing that idea is going to be something that will stay with you for the rest of your career. Software you can learn later. Like, this is about being able to take an idea and make it real and set it and defend it and test it. And I think that's where I think that degree of innovation and reality and thoroughness is something that, as an architecture student, I would probably like to
yeah.
embrace if I was starting.
And what's one advice that you would ask a student not to do? Don't do this.
Not to do. I would try not to label the different aspects of education that you are going to receive and to separate them, which very often we see. You have technical studies, and then I learn about technical elements, and then theory is separated in a different way, and then design is done in a completely different studio, different way as well. I think that the students that manage to merge all of it together and that they have a driver that can be articulated across all of them is something that maybe doesn't happen your first year, but you can start building it already. I think that then it becomes completely kind of successful run experience for the student, and then you can take that to practice, and again, not see a practice as something that is labeled between departments that each one is specifically working into something, but as a production, which very often, if you get labeled into one of these departments, as we were saying before, you might not get the overall overview. So I think that if you learn from the university to avoid that labeling and to see the overall picture, not only within what you are studying, but within the entire cohort of university, and you are able to collaborate with practitioners, you are able to collaborate with photography students, with science students, with landscape students, which they might bring knowledge that you might want to implement into and embrace into your project. I think that then is when it becomes really rewarding for the student as well. And we have students that finish their education building a one-to-one prototype of a construction system that is tested and that is very well published, and then they publish that into specialized magazines and media. And to me, that's such a strong card if you go to a practice, because it has demonstrated that you have been so thorough and that you have learned, you have designed it, you have learned how to build it, and you have gone through the whole process. I would employ that person right away. And so I think that, like,
Yeah.
if you manage to maybe leave these preconceptions and also leave the fear of I need to be prepared for that, or I need to be prepared, I need to learn this or what that program, rather than this, like, learn how to materialize an idea and defend it and make it yours.
Yeah. Good. That's great.
Yeah, Armor, thank you so much for this episode. It's been very insightful and motivational. And I think it gives us as well a reminder of our times at uni exploring materials, when sometimes when we get into practice, well, depending on the practice, but we could sometimes get too focused of the traditional architecture and busy of drawings package, whatever, and then this creativity, this thinking outside the box sometimes get a bit lost. And so it's a good reminder to go to your rear garden, what's there that you could explore, learn, innovate. And I think that's very interesting. And I think at the end of the day, an architect is more just that, is a creator, is an innovator, explorer, that it will put a better building environment into society. So that's been very, very important on this, listening to you. So thank you for that.
I'm glad to hear and seeing how that legacy goes with you guys, and you take it forward as well. That's really rich. And I think that, as you were saying, Pedro, like, just like, try it yourself, like, and I think that architectural practice has lost a bit this ability of saying, okay, I want to spend 1 hour in a workshop testing something with my hands. It seems that that's out of the question. And even like model makers are labeled as model makers. That shouldn't be like that. Like, we should be able to express ourselves with our hands and to bridge that gap between the brain and the hand. Like, we should be able to be the ones saying, okay, I want to, and not having that, like, kind of label approach where, like, you have almost 25 different labels and you need to be labeled in the office. Okay, when I was, like, at the last years that I spent at KPF, they needed to label me in a way that you need to be you are an expert on this field, so we need to write a label that really fits and matches you. And I said, but I'm not an expert on that field. Maybe that's what I have been doing, and I have a bit more of experience, but I really don't want to be labeled in that. I don't recognize myself into that particular role only, and it's one of the reasons why I went into academia, and we are developing now this research group where we are a bit more free to operate in different ways, because I didn't feel that I could be for the next 10 years labeled in a particular category within an architectural practice. I thought it was broader than that.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Thank you, Armor. Again and again, you are a tutor. Now you're a guest, contributing to the society with your knowledge, your huge ocean of knowledge. Just thank you so much for talking to us for the past 1 hour. Where can people find you if they want to contact you?
Yes, the best way is to Google Sugarcrete, and then the website of the University of East London appears first. So you
That's
just
great.
click there,
Yeah.
my contact is at the bottom. You can then go there through all the projects that we have developed. We have all the reports that we do with the students there, so people can download them. And my contact details are in the website. So if anyone wants to get in touch with any questions, whether it's regarding bio-based materials, education, University of East London, or anything else, I would be very happy to follow up.
We'll put the links below in the video.
Perfect. And then, of course, on Instagram, we have 2 Instagram accounts. One of them is Unit 8, which is the name of the unit that we lead, that Pedro and Stefano were part of for 2 years at the university. And then we have another Instagram account, which is Sugarcrete. So both of them can be followed if you want to be updated with the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Armor. Hopefully this episode makes people try to think more how to think like an architect and learn something new from the show. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a bit maybe bias on what I think that architecture should.
No. I mean, that's the point. Get different perspectives so that we can fix the puzzle. It's a jigsaw puzzle.